Follow along with me as we review the word surrender on Handout 24B. We're going to go back to chapter 19 because chapter 19 is all about this idea of surrender. Be sure to add this to your prayer diagram as we go along. Surrender is when someone gives up or gives in to another power or demands. So some characteristics are when someone quits or stops an activity because they know they can't win. A person who surrenders must agree to the winner's terms, and the person who surrenders doesn't want any more harm done. So some examples, sometimes in a boxing match, an opponent will surrender or give up. Or in our example in the story, Chief Joseph surrenders because he knows the Nez Perce cannot defeat the white soldiers. Some non-examples are when someone keeps fighting, even if they know they can't win, or when someone pretends to quit to gain an advantage. Kind of like the white settlers did. They pretended to the truce so that they could attack. I'd like for you to flip your handout. And we have two sides when it comes to surrendering. We have those that are against surrender, and we have those who are in favor or for it. And we know that the biggest person who was in favor was Chief Joseph. As we reread chapter 19, we're going to pay close attention to who was against and who was in favor of surrender. So open up to chapter 19 in your text. Starts on page 103. Our warriors fought the rest of the day and the next. They fought with new anger. Chief Joseph had not been treated as an honored prisoner. The bluecoats tied his hands behind him, then tied his hands to his feet. They rolled him in a blanket like a papoose. He could not stand, he could not walk, he could not use his arms. The white soldiers slept in a tent, but my father lay all night beside the mules, without food or water. He was not untied until the paper that speaks came from the soldier, Jerome. So why are they mad? They're mad with a new anger because they're not treating their most prized Native American, Chief Joseph, the head of their tribe, with respect. They're treating him like an animal. They're tying him up. They're making him sleep next to the donkeys without any food or water while they lay nicely in their beds and sleep at night. 2 sons came and went, aka 2 days. We had lost no people since the first day of battle, but food was short. Soon even the children would have to go hungry. We were cold and wet with snow. The cruel wind cut to our very bones. The children cried. The women and old men said nothing, but there was pain in their eyes. The 3rd son was a sad time for us. The sadness began in the morning when it grew light, and we saw that a party of white soldiers had arrived during the darkness. The one-armed general had joined Colonel Miles. An army of bluecoats would soon spread across the land. When the shooting began that morning, the first shells fell among us. During the night, the white soldiers had dug a trench for their cannons, and the shells no longer struck the bluffs beyond the rifle pits. Another act of shame. The soldier Jerome knew that no warriors were in the shelter pits. Again, they warred on the helpless. Shells fell among the women and the children, the old men and the wounded soldiers. 1 shell burst in a shelter pit, covering 6 of our people with earth. We dug fast, scooping away the choking dirt with pots and hats in our hands. I pulled a small boy from the pit. His eyes and ears and mouth were full of earth, and he gasped for air, but he was safe. Others dragged 3 women to safety, but we could not reach an old woman and her granddaughter. There was too much dirt. Without air, they died. My father said that we were beaten. The time had come to surrender. Not everyone agreed. Some of the warriors wanted to charge the bluecoats. They said the bluecoats were bad fighters. We might whip them and be free to join Sitting Bull. They would be glad to die for the people. Pause the video and write down some of the reasons that the soldiers are against surrender. My father said no. We could not fight the cannon, and there were too many soldiers. All our warriors would die, and the women and children and old men would be at the mercy of the Bluecoats. My father reminded them of what happened to the women and children at Big Hole. It was better to return to Lapwai and live on the reservation. Pause the video and add, why is Chief Joseph in favor of surrender? Looking Glass said he would never surrender. He looked at my father. I am older than you, he said. I know the white generals are men with 2 faces and 2 tongues. If you surrender, you will be sorry. It is better to be dead. So we have Looking Glass on this side. Whitebird held up his hand. Looking Glass speaks the truth, he said. Surrender if you wish. We will not stop you. We will take those who would rather die and strike out for the old lady's country. The council broke up. The sadness was not yet over. A rider on horseback appeared in the distance. Looking Glass believed it was a Sioux scout, part of a band from Sitting Bull. He stepped out of the rifle pit for a close look. A bullet struck him in the head, and he fell sprawled and silent on the ground. We had lost another chief. Now only my father and Whitebird were left to lead us. My father was not a war chief, and Whitebird was old. Under a white flag, my father crossed the plain to the camp of the Bluecoats. The day was gray, and he was wrapped in a gray blanket. His head was down, his rifle lay across the saddle. Wearily, he climbed from his horse and walked up to Colonel Miles. Let us stop fighting, said Colonel Miles. No more battles, no more blood. The one-armed general stood beside him. Ice crystals hung to his beard. The war is over, he said. I have lost my brothers. Many of you have lost brothers. Do not worry more. It is time for us to rest. Even with his head bowed, my father towered over General Howard. He drew his blanket closer about him and nodded, but did not speak. Colonel Miles said that he had plenty of food and warm blankets for us. He promised that he would take our people to a nearby camp for the winter. Then we could all go back to our old homes. The one-armed general watched Chief Joseph and Colonel Miles shake hands. Then my father walked back to his pony and picked up his rifle. General Howard reached for it. Chief Joseph pulled back the hand holding the gun. He stood very tall. He looked down at the one-armed general. I am not surrendering to you, he said. He pointed to Colonel Miles. This is the man that ran me down. My father turned to Colonel Miles. He handed him his gun, but first. Then he stepped back. Pay close attention to the reasons that Chief Joseph is in favor of surrendering, and add them to your chart. I am tired of fighting, he said. Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. The old men are all killed. He who led the young men is dead. It is cold and we have no blankets. The little children are freezing to death. My people, some of them, have run away to the hills and have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are, perhaps freezing to death. I want time to look for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. He raised his arm. His blanket flapped in the raw wind. Hear me, my chiefs, he called. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. In sorrow, he drew his blanket over his head. One by one, our warriors stepped from the rifle pits and filed across the plain. They laid their rifles on the ground in front of the generals. From the shelter pits came the women and children, followed by the old. Wounded warriors crawled from the pits. Some of them leaned on the women and old men. Some of them crawled on their hands and knees. Slowly, the long lines of people moved across the ground and up the hill. My heart was filled with sadness. I could not join them. Even when I saw a dear woman trudge slowly up the hill, bearing Bending Willow on her back, I could not join them. So those who are against surrendering include Looking Glass and Whitebird, and they believe that the Whitecoats are weak fighters and that they could defeat them. They also think that the white generals will not keep their promise if the Nez Perce surrender. Chief Joseph, however, thinks that they should surrender. He thinks they can't win against the soldiers and their cannons, that if they continue, their warriors will die and no one will be left to protect the women and children. He believes the best option is to surrender and go back to the reservation at Lapwai. His people and many older chiefs are dead. They're freezing and hungry, and he's tired of fighting. So when I look at all of Chief Joseph's reasoning, I know his decision, back to our notes from yesterday, is to surrender. And what finally led to this decision, what was the event that happened, was when his last chief was shot in the head. And all that was left were him and an older chief. And he said, we just can't fight any longer. So as we try to find the essential meaning of Chief Joseph's speech, we can see some of the words or images that stick with us from his speech. How did those words impact you? How do you feel as you read them? When we reflect on the essential meaning of a text, we consider the deepest understanding of the text and what it means. So, some of the things that you might think are his words leave you with a deep feeling of sadness for what his people have lost. You might feel angry as you read the words because of how unfair it was that the Nez Perce were treated this way. Overall, Chief Joseph communicates his desire to end the violence and to take care of his people. That we can understand just how much the Nez Perce have lost, their land, innocent people, including women and children, and warriors and chiefs, and that Chief Joseph's sadness and concern for his people. The people have always been important to him, and he didn't want to go to war in the first place because of this. So at the bottom of your page, what is the essential meaning? What is the purpose of surrendering? Why does Chief Joseph feel they need to surrender based on his speech that he gives at the end of chapter 19? What is the essential meaning?